At 5:47 a.m., the ground didn't just shake, it roared. 450 motorcycles surrounded Marlene's tiny trailer, trapping her inside. She thought it was the end, but she had no idea that her $67 mistake from 3 days ago was about to change her life forever. Before we reveal what happened, hit that like button, subscribe, and comment below with the city or country you're watching from right now. Now let's go back to where it all began. The ground shook at 5:47 on a Saturday morning in October. Not an earthquake, something else, something that would change everything. But that comes later. This story begins 3 days earlier in the dark when Marlene Hutchins woke at 4:30 in the morning, like she always did, in a trailer that leaked when it rained and baked like an oven in the Arizona summer. She was 54 years old. She had worked as a waitress for 17 years, and she had $43 to her name. She knew because she counted it every morning. The ritual never changed. Marlene sat on the edge of her bed in the darkness, the springs creaking beneath her weight, and reached under the mattress for the coffee can. Red and white, Folgers, the metal cool against her fingers. She pried off the plastic lid and counted the bills inside by touch alone. 1 5, 2 10s, 3 5s, 8 1s, $43. The same as yesterday. She counted again just to be sure. Her hands moved slowly, deliberately, the way hands move when they've counted the same money too many times. When every dollar means the difference between eating and not eating, between lights on and lights off, between a roof and the street. $43. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. Marlene replaced the lid and slid the can back under the mattress. She stood to her knees, protesting, and walked to the window. Outside, the desert stretched away into nothing. Sagebrush and Parnin and Scarpon. No lights except the distant glow of Tucson, 30 miles south. No sound except the wind rattling the aluminum siding. She'd lived here for 6 years, ever since Robert died. Robert, her husband, the man who'd promised her a better life and then left her with $22,000 in medical debt and a 16-year-old son who still believed the world was good. The thought of Dylan made her chest tighten. He was asleep on the couch in the living room. Not because he wanted to be, because his bedroom had a hole in the roof, and when it rained, water poured through and soaked everything. She'd patched it 3 times with duct tape and plastic sheeting, but the Arizona monsoons always found a way through. So Dylan slept on the couch, folded into himself, his long legs hanging over the armrest, and he never complained. Not once. Marlene watched him through the doorway. 17 in 3 months, almost a man. He had Robert's jaw and her eyes and a smile that could break your heart if you let it. She'd tried so hard to give him something better than this, tried to save enough for trade school, electrician training, something real, something with a future. She'd saved $940. She needed $1,850. She was $910 short, and this morning she had $43 to her name and 2 days before the electric company shut off the power. Marlene turned away from the window and walked to the kitchen. The floor was cold linoleum, cracked in places, peeling at the edges. She filled the coffee pot with water from the tap and spooned grounds into the filter. 3 scoops, not 4. Coffee was expensive. While it brewed, she opened the refrigerator. The light inside was dim, the bulb dying. Half a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter nearly empty, 3 eggs, a stick of butter, a carton of milk with 2 days left before it expired. She took out 2 slices of bread and closed the door. The coffee finished brewing. She poured herself a cup, black, no sugar, and stood at the counter, drinking it while she made Dylan's breakfast. 1 slice of bread with peanut butter, the other slice plain. She wrapped them in a paper towel and set them on the counter next to his backpack. For herself, nothing. She wasn't hungry anyway. Marlene finished her coffee and rinsed the cup in the sink. She looked at the stack of envelopes on the kitchen table. Bills, always bills. The electric company's final notice sat on top, red letters screaming at her. 48 hours, $80, or the power goes off. She had $43. She picked up the notice and read it again, even though she'd memorized every word, as if reading it one more time might change the numbers, might make the math work out differently. It didn't. Marlene set the notice back on the table and walked to the bathroom. She brushed her teeth, washed her face, looked at herself in the mirror. 54 years old, and she looked older. Lines around her eyes, gray in her hair, a tiredness that went deeper than sleep could fix. Her grandmother had looked the same way. Helen, Helen Hutchins, a waitress just like Marlene, a woman who'd worked herself to the bone and died with nothing but a reputation for kindness in a funeral that nobody came to except family. Marlene remembered her grandmother's voice, soft, patient, the voice that had raised her after her mother left and her father drank himself to death. Feed the hungry Marley, always, no matter what. Her grandmother had lived by that rule, even when it cost her everything. Marlene remembered being 12 years old sitting in her grandmother's kitchen, watching an old man in ragged clothes eat soup at the table, a drifter, a nobody, and her grandmother had given him the last of the food in the house, $20 from her purse, a blanket for the road. Marlene's father had been furious. They'd gone to bed hungry that night, and the next and the next. "We're starving because you're too generous," he'd shouted. Her grandmother had just smiled. Dignity costs nothing, she'd said, but it means everything. Marlene wondered now if her grandmother had been wrong, if kindness was just another word for foolish, if dignity meant anything when you were drowning in debt and your lights were about to get shut off and your son was sleeping on a couch because the roof leaked. She turned away from the mirror. It was 5:15 in the morning. Time to go. Marlene walked back to the living room and stood over Dylan. He was asleep, his face peaceful, one arm thrown over his head. She wanted to wake him, wanted to tell him she loved him, wanted to promise him everything would be okay. But she didn't, because it wouldn't be okay. And lying to him wouldn't change that. Instead, she bent down and kissed his forehead so lightly he didn't stir, and then she straightened and walked to the door. Her car was parked outside, a 2004 Honda Civic with 200,000 miles on it and an engine that sounded like it was dying. She tried to start it yesterday, and it had coughed and sputtered and refused. The mechanic said it needed a new alternator. $300. She didn't have $300, so she walked 3 miles down the highway to the Dusty Plains Diner, where she'd worked the morning shift for the past 17 years. The sun wasn't up yet. The desert was still dark, the sky a deep purple fading to orange on the horizon. The air was cold, the kind of cold that burned your lungs when you breathed. Marlene walked along the shoulder of the road, her shoes crunching on gravel, and thought about nothing, about everything, about the bills on the table and the coffee can under the mattress and the way Dylan's face looked when he thought she wasn't watching. Tired, worried, older than 16. He knew. Of course he knew. Kids always knew. She walked faster. The diner appeared in the distance, a low, squat building with a flashing neon sign that said, Dusty Plains in red letters. Half the letters were burned out. It just said Dusty now. The parking lot was empty except for a single 18-wheeler and a beat-up motorcycle with out-of-state plates. Marlene pushed through the front door. The bell chimed. The smell of coffee and grease hit her like a wall. The diner was almost empty. A trucker sat at the counter staring into his phone. An older woman occupied a booth near the window picking at a plate of eggs. Behind the counter stood Vernon Briggs. Vernon was 48 years old and had inherited the diner from his father 10 years ago. He was a small man with small eyes and a mean mouth. He treated his employees like they were disposable because to him they were. Marlene had seen him fire 3 people in the past year. One mistake, one complaint, one moment of weakness, and you were gone. She kept her head down and tied on her apron. "Good morning," Vernon said. His voice was flat. He didn't look at her. "Good morning," Marlene replied. "You're late." She glanced at the clock. 5:28. Her shift started at 5:30. "No, sir," she said quietly. "I'm early." Vernon turned and looked at her. His eyes were cold. "Don't get smart with me, Marlene. I'm not in the mood." She didn't respond. She just nodded and walked to the coffee station and started a fresh pot. Her hands moved on autopilot. 17 years of the same routine. Tie the apron, start the coffee, wipe down the counter, check the tables, smile at the customers. Don't make waves, don't complain, don't give Vernon a reason. The other waitress, Rita Holloway, came out of the back room carrying a tray of clean mugs. Rita was 40 years old with bleached blonde hair and a sharp tongue. She'd worked at the diner for 8 years and hated every minute of it. She hated Vernon. She hated the customers. And most of all, she hated Marlene, though Marlene had never understood why. Rita set the tray down hard, Look who decided to show up, she said. Marlene ignored her. What? No hello? Rita smirked. Too good to talk to me now. I'm just trying to work, Rita, aren't we all? Rita muttered. She walked past Marlene, her shoulder bumping into Marlene's arm. It wasn't an accident. The door chimed again. The trucker left. The older woman paid and shuffled out. The diner was empty now, except for Marlene, Rita, and Vernon. Marlene poured herself a cup of coffee and stood behind the counter watching the sun rise through the windows. The desert turned gold. The sky lightened. Another day, another shift, another chance to scrape together a few more dollars and hope it was enough. It never was. At 5:45, the door opened again. 5 men walked in. Marlene looked up and felt something shift in the air. Something heavy. Something wrong. They were bikers. She could tell by the leather vests, the patches, the boots. But it wasn't the clothes that made her stomach tighten. It was their faces. Exhausted. Hollowed out. Eyes red from crying or lack of sleep or both. Shoulders slumped under the weight of something too big to carry. Grief. Marlene had seen that look before. At Robert's funeral. At her grandmother's. At her father's. Grief was a language all its own, and these men were fluent. The other 2 customers, a young couple who just sat down, took one look at the bikers and stood up. They left money on the table and hurried out the door. The bell chimed. Silence. Rita disappeared into the back room without a word. Marlene stood alone behind the counter. The 5 men walked slowly to the corner booth, the one with the duct-tape seat and the wobbly table. They sat down heavily like men who'd been riding too long. None of them spoke. None of them looked at each other. Marlene took a breath and walked over. The oldest one looked up at her. He was maybe 60 with a gray beard and a scar across his knuckles. His eyes were bloodshot. His voice when he spoke was rough but not unkind. We need food, he said. All of it. Whatever you got. Marlene pulled out her order pad. What can I get you? Eggs, he said. Bacon, pancakes, burgers, fries, coffee, orange juice. Just keep it coming. She wrote it down. For all of you? He nodded. She looked at the other 4 men. One was maybe 45, broad-shouldered, with grease-stained hands. He kept touching a patch on his vest, a name stitched in gold thread. Dutch. Another was young, 25 maybe. His eyes were swollen and red. He'd been crying recently, maybe still was. The 3rd man was in his 50s, thin, hollow-faced. He stared at the wall like he couldn't see anything else. The last one was maybe 38, the scruffiest of the group. His jacket was torn. His boots were falling apart. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days. Marlene finished writing. I'll get this started, she said. Thank you, ma'am, the older man said. His voice cracked on the last word. She walked back to the counter and clipped the order to the wheel. Vernon was in the kitchen, leaning against the prep station, arms crossed. 5 bikers, Marlene said. Big order. Vernon looked through the window at the booth. His jaw tightened. You better not screw this up, he said. I won't. And don't get soft on them, Marlene. I'm watching. She didn't respond. She just started the coffee and began pulling plates. The food came up fast. Eggs, scrambled bacon, crispy pancakes stacked high. She loaded everything onto trays and carried it out. The 5 men didn't look up when she set the plates down. They just started eating. Not like hungry men, like desperate ones. Marlene refilled their coffee 3 times. She brought more orange juice, more toast. They ate in silence. No phones, no laughter, just forks scraping plates and the low hum of exhaustion. She caught fragments of conversation. 500 miles, buried him yesterday, 40 years in the club. Dutch would have wanted this. She didn't ask questions. She just kept the coffee coming. When they finished, she cleared the plates and brought the check. $67.38. The older man looked at it for a long time. His jaw tightened. He glanced at the others. They avoided his eyes. Then he looked up at Marlene. Ma'am, he said, I'm going to be straight with you. His voice cracked again. We don't have it. Marlene blinked. I'm sorry. We spent everything we had burying our brother, he said. We rode through the night. We're 500 miles from home. We got nothing left. The table went silent. The young one put his face in his hands. The man in his 50s stared at the wall. The scruffy one looked like he might cry. The older man pulled out his wallet. He opened it. Inside were three crumpled $1 bills and a photograph of a man in a leather vest. The same man whose name was stitched on the patch. Dutch. This is all we got, he said quietly. $3. Marlene felt her stomach drop. She thought about these bills on her kitchen table, the electric company's final notice, the $43 under her mattress, the $910 she still needed for Dylan's trade school. She thought about Vernon watching from the kitchen, about Rita smirking in the back room, about the last time she'd been short on a bill and Vernon had docked her pay and told her maybe she'd learn. She did the math in her head. $67 was 2 days of groceries. It was the late fee on her rent. It was the difference between the lights staying on and sitting in the dark with Dylan pretending everything was fine. She looked at the 5 men, exhausted, grieving, hungry. She thought about Robert's funeral, how strangers had brought food, how the church ladies had filled her freezer and told her not to worry about paying them back, how kindness had kept her alive when nothing else could. She thought about her grandmother's voice. Feed the hungry Marley. Always. No matter what. Dignity costs nothing. But it means everything. Marlene looked at the check in her hand. Then she tore it in half. The sound was loud in the quiet diner. She folded the 2 pieces and slipped them into her apron pocket. You buried family, she said quietly. Nobody leaves here hungry. The 5 men stared at her. The older man's eyes filled with tears. Ma'am, he started to say. She shook her head. Just go. Be safe. One of the men stood. He pulled out his wallet. He had 3 crumpled dollar bills. He tried to hand them to her. She refused. Keep it, she said. You'll need gas. They stood slowly. One by one, they shook her hand. The young one hugged her. His voice broke when he spoke. Thank you, he whispered. You have no idea what this means. Marlene watched them walk to the door, watched them climb onto their motorcycles, watched them disappear into the gray morning light. She stood in the doorway until the sound of their engines faded completely. Then she turned around. Vernon was standing behind the counter. His face was red. His voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. What the hell was that? Marlene didn't answer. You just gave away $67, Vernon said. That's coming out of your check, Marlene, every cent. She nodded, I know. He walked away muttering under his breath. Rita came out of the back room. She looked at Marlene like she'd lost her mind. You're an idiot, Rita said. You know that? Those guys probably have more money than you. They just didn't want to pay. Marlene didn't respond. She cleared the table, wiped it down, threw away the torn check. She worked the rest of her shift in silence. When she clocked out at 2 in the afternoon, Vernon handed her a note, handwritten. Dock $67 from your next check. Maybe you'll think twice next time. She folded the note and put it in her pocket. She walked home. 3 miles. The sun was high and hot, and the desert stretched away forever. Dylan was doing homework at the kitchen table when she walked in. He looked up. You okay, Mom? She smiled. Always, baby. That night, Marlene couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the water stain on the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the siding. She thought about the 5 men, about the look in their eyes, about the way the young one had hugged her. She thought about Vernon, about the $67, about the bills on the table and the $43 under the mattress. She thought about her grandmother. Was Grandma wrong? Did kindness kill her in the end? Marlene closed her eyes. For the first time in 6 years, she prayed. Not for money, just for strength, just for one more day. She didn't know it yet, but 3 days from now, at 5:47 in the morning, the ground would shake. 450 motorcycles would surround her trailer. And her $67 mistake would buy her something she never saw coming. But that was still 3 days away. Tonight, she just needed to survive until morning. Wednesday came like every other day, gray and cold and unforgiving. Marlene woke at 4:30, counted the money in the coffee can, $43, still, made Dylan's breakfast. 1 slice of bread with peanut butter, 1 slice plain, drank her coffee black, walked 3 miles to the diner. The routine never changed, only the desperation deepened. The diner was dead, 4 customers all day, a trucker who left $2 on a $10 check, a woman who complained about everything and left nothing, 2 teenagers who split a single plate of fries and paid in coins. By 2 in the afternoon, Marlene had made $9 in tips. $9. Rita watched her count it at the end of the shift and laughed. That's what you get for being too generous, she said. You threw away 67 bucks for strangers. Now what's Dylan gonna eat? Marlene didn't answer. She just folded the bills and put them in her apron pocket. Vernon was in the back office when she clocked out. She could hear him on the phone laughing about something. The sound made her stomach turn. She walked home in the heat. The sun was brutal. By the time she reached the trailer, her shirt was soaked through with sweat. Dylan was on the couch hunched over his laptop. He closed it quickly when she walked in. Hey, Mom. Hey, baby. How was school? Fine. He was lying, she could always tell, but she didn't push. What was the point? Marlene dropped her apron on the counter and went to the kitchen table. The stack of envelopes sat there like a monument to failure. She picked up the one on top. Electric company. Final notice. 48 hours. She'd read it so many times the words had lost meaning. But the number hadn't changed. $80, due in 2 days, or the power goes off. She had $43 in the coffee can. $9 in her pocket. 52 total. She was $28 short. Her phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. Rent overdue. 48 hours or I file eviction. Her landlord, a man she'd never met who owned 40 trailers in this park and didn't care about anything except collecting checks on time. Marlene set the phone down. Her hands were shaking. Rent was $420. Due 5 days ago, she'd asked for an extension. He'd given her 1 week. That week was almost up. She did the math again even though she'd done it 100 times. Rent, $420. Electric, $80. Food, at least $60 for the next 2 weeks. Total, $560. She had $52. She was $508 short. The number sat in her chest like a stone. Marlene walked to the refrigerator and opened it. Half a loaf of bread. The peanut butter jar almost empty. 2 eggs. No milk. The butter was gone. She closed the door. Dylan was still on the couch pretending to watch something on his phone. But she could see the tension in his shoulders. The way he held himself too still. He knew. Of course he knew. You hungry? She asked. He shook his head. Nah, I'm good. Another lie. Marlene wanted to scream. Wanted to throw something. Wanted to grab him and tell him it wasn't supposed to be like this. She was supposed to take care of him. Supposed to give him a future. Supposed to be enough. But she wasn't. Instead, she smiled. Okay, baby. Let me know if you change your mind. She went to her room and closed the door. Then she sat on the bed and cried as quietly as she could. Thursday was worse. Marlene woke up and counted the money. $52. Made Dylan's breakfast. The peanut butter jar was empty now. She scraped the sides with a knife and got just enough for 1 slice. The other slice was plain. She didn't drink coffee. They were out. She walked to the diner. The sun was just coming up, turning the desert pink and gold. It was beautiful. She didn't notice. The diner was even deader than yesterday. 3 customers all morning. One left $1, one left 50 cents, one left nothing. By noon, Marlene had made $1.50. Rita didn't even bother mocking her this time. She just looked at her with something like pity, which was worse. At 2 o'clock, Vernon called her into the back office. He was sitting behind the desk, a stack of papers in front of him. He didn't look up when she walked in. Sit down, Marlene. She sat. Vernon finally looked at her. His face was blank. I've been going over the books, he said. You've been here a long time. 17 years, she said quietly. 17 years, Vernon nodded. That's a long time to work for minimum wage. She didn't respond. I'm making some changes, Vernon said. Cutting costs, streamlining operations. You understand? Her heart started to pound. Are you firing me? Vernon smiled. It wasn't a kind smile, not yet. But one more mistake, Marlene, and you're done. You understand me? She nodded. Good. He picked up an envelope and handed it to her. Here's your check. Don't spend it all in one place. She took it. Her hands were shaking again. She walked out of the office and straight to the bathroom. Locked the door, opened the envelope. Her paycheck. 2 weeks of work, minus $67. Vernon had docked her pay, just like he'd promised. The check was for $103. Before taxes, after taxes, it was $89. Marlene stared at the number. $89. She had 52 in her pocket and the coffee can. That made 141 total. She was still $419 short. She leaned against the sink and closed her eyes. When she opened them, she looked at herself in the mirror. 54 years old and falling apart. Gray hair, tired eyes. A woman who'd worked her whole life and had nothing to show for it. Her grandmother's voice whispered in her head, "Dignity costs nothing." Marlene almost laughed. Almost. She folded the check and put it in her pocket. Then she went back to work. At the end of her shift, she walked to the grocery store and cashed the check. $89. The cashier counted it out. 4 20s, a 5, and 4 1s. Marlene bought a bag of rice, a bag of beans, a box of pasta, a jar of the cheapest peanut butter they had. Total, $19. She had $70 left. At the gas station, she counted out coins from her apron pocket and pumped $3 of them into the tank. Just enough to get home. She drove slowly. The car coughed and sputtered the whole way. Dylan was at the kitchen table when she walked in. He had his laptop open. He closed it quickly when he saw her. Marlene set the groceries on the counter. "Hey, baby." "Hey, Mom." She started putting things away. Rice in the cupboard, beans next to it, pasta, peanut butter. Dylan watched her. His face was careful. Too careful. "Mom," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," he hesitated. "Are we going to be okay?" Marlene turned and looked at him. Her beautiful boy, Robert's son. The only good thing she had left in the world. She wanted to tell him the truth. Wanted to say, "No, we're not okay. We're drowning and I don't know how to save us." But she didn't. She smiled. "Always, baby. We're always okay." Dylan nodded, but she could see it in his eyes. He didn't believe her. That night, Marlene lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. The water stain had grown. It looked like a face now, a sad, dripping face. She thought about the 5 men, the bikers, the way they'd looked at her when she tore up the check. The young one's voice. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means." She wondered where they were now. Wondered if they'd made it home. Wondered if they even remembered her. Probably not. She was just a waitress. Nobody. A woman who'd made a stupid decision and was paying for it now. Marlene closed her eyes. She didn't pray this time. What was the point? But 500 miles away in a clubhouse in Nevada, something was happening that she didn't know about. Something that would change everything. Raymond Bledsoe sat at a scarred wooden table in the Hells Angels clubhouse outside Reno. It was Tuesday night, 8 o'clock. The place was packed. 50 men all wearing the same leather vests, all with the same patches. All brothers. The president sat at the head of the table. Leonard Maddox. Everyone called him Preacher. He was 62 years old with gray hair and hands scarred from 30 years of fighting and fixing motorcycles and living hard. He'd served in the Gulf War, came back with shrapnel in his leg and nightmares that never went away. He'd found the club, found family, found a code that made sense when nothing else did. Razor stood up. The room went quiet. "I need to tell you something," Razor said. His voice was rough. He'd been crying on and off for 2 days, ever since they'd buried Dutch. Dutch Carver. 40 years in the club. A legend. A man who'd saved 12 people from a warehouse fire in 2003. A man who'd pulled brothers out of bar fights, in jail cells, and addiction. A man who'd been family to everyone in this room. They'd buried him yesterday, and it had taken everything they had. "We were broke," Razor said. He looked around the room. "All of us, we spent every dime on the funeral, on getting Dutch home, on doing right by him." The room was silent. "We stopped at a diner outside Tucson. On the way back," Razor continued. "Me, Marcus, Wyatt, Jesse, Colt. We hadn't eaten in 2 days. We ordered food, a lot of it. And when the check came," he paused, his jaw tightened. "We didn't have it. $67. We had $3 between the 5 of us." Someone in the back of the room swore softly. The waitress, Razor said, "Older lady, maybe 55. She looked at us, and you know what she did?" He looked around the room. She tore up the check. Right in front of us. Said, "Nobody who buries family leaves hungry." The room erupted. Men talking over each other. "What? Who was she?" Where Preacher raised his hand. The room went silent again. Razor kept talking. Her boss saw. Docked to her pay, $67. She didn't argue, didn't complain, just took it. Wyatt stood up. He was 25. Dutch's son. He'd been quiet for 2 days. Now his voice was shaking. She didn't know us, Wyatt said. Didn't know who we were. Didn't know Dad. But she fed us anyway. She gave us dignity when we had nothing left. Tears ran down his face. And it cost her everything. Preacher looked at Razor. You get her name? Razor nodded. Marlene Hutchins. I saw it on her name tag. Preacher stood. He was a big man. 6'2", 230 pounds. When he spoke, his voice filled the room. What's our code, he asked. The room answered as one. We protect our own. This woman fed our brothers, Preacher said. She showed honor when the world sees us as dirt. She's family now. You understand me? She's our own. Silence, Val. So what do we do? Preacher asked. The answer came from everywhere at once. We protect her. Preacher nodded. He pulled out his phone and started making calls. Within an hour, he'd reached out to 11 other chapters. Arizona, California, New Mexico, Texas, Utah, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho. The same conversation every time. A waitress in Arizona fed 5 of our brothers when they were broke and grieving. Her boss punished her for it. We're riding to help her. You in every chapter said yes, not because they knew Marlene, because they knew the code. You show honor, you get honor back. By midnight, word had spread through the network like wildfire. Bikers from 12 states started pledging money. $50 here, $200 there, $500 from a chapter in Sacramento, $1,000 from a club in Phoenix. The reasons were all different. Dutch saved my daughter from that warehouse fire. I owe him everything. My mom was a waitress. She fed me on tips. I know what it's like. I've been there, broke, hungry. Someone helped me once. Time to pay it forward. By Thursday morning, the fund had grown to $18,000. By Thursday night, it was $32,000. By Friday morning, it was $38,400. Preacher sat in the clubhouse office looking at the numbers on his laptop. Razor stood beside him. 38 grand, Razor said. In 2 days. Preacher nodded. He looked up. You said she has a kid. Yeah, teenage son. And her boss docked her pay $67. Preacher's jaw tightened. He stood up and walked to the window. Outside, motorcycles lined the parking lot, brothers working on engines, cleaning chrome, talking, laughing, family. We ride Saturday, Preacher said. Dawn, I want 450 bikes. Razor blinked. 450, that's half the network. Preacher turned and looked at him. We're not just bringing money, we're bringing a message. You show kindness to our brothers, you get protected. By all of us, Razor smiled. I'll make the calls. Friday afternoon, Marlene walked into the diner and found an envelope taped to her locker. She stared at it. No name, no return address, just a plain white envelope. She looked around. Rita was nowhere in sight. Vernon was in the kitchen. Marlene pulled the envelope off the locker and opened it. Inside was $200 in cash. 20s. 10 of them. And a handwritten note. For the waitress who feeds strangers. You're not alone. Marlene's hands started to shake. Her vision blurred. She sat down hard on the bench and stared at the money. $200. Who? Why, Rita walked in. She saw the money. Her eyes went wide. What the hell is that? Where'd you get that? Marlene didn't answer. She folded the bills carefully and put them in her pocket. The note went in too. Rita stepped closer. Did someone give you money? Who? Marlene stood. Her legs felt weak. I don't know, she said quietly. You don't know? Rita laughed. People don't just hand out $200 for no reason, Marlene. I don't know, Marlene repeated. She tied on her apron and walked out to the floor. The shift passed in a blur. She kept touching the pocket where the money was, kept thinking about the note. You're not alone, but she was alone. She'd been alone for 6 years. At the end of the shift, Vernon handed her a piece of paper without looking at her. Here, he said. She looked at it. Her paycheck, for 1 week, $67 short, again. The check was for $41 after taxes. Marlene folded it and put it in her pocket next to the $200. She walked to the bank and cashed the check. $41. Then she went to the grocery store and bought more rice, more beans, a gallon of milk, some eggs. She stopped at the gas station and pumped $5 of gas. Then she drove home. Dylan was on the couch. His laptop was open. When he saw her, he closed it. But not before she saw what was on the screen. How to drop out of high school and work full-time. Marlene's heart stopped. She set the groceries on the counter and walked over to him. She sat down next to him on the couch. "Dylan," she said softly, "what were you looking at?" He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Nothing. Baby, please." He looked at her. His eyes were wet. "I can get a job, Mom. I can help. You don't have to do this alone." Marlene felt something break inside her chest. "No," she said. "No, baby, you're not dropping out. We need the money." "No," she grabbed his hand. "You're going to finish school. You're going to trade school. You're going to be an electrician. You're going to have a life. What about you?" Dylan's voice cracked. "What kind of life do you have?" Marlene couldn't answer. She just pulled him close and held him while he cried. That night, she used the $200 to pay the electric bill, $80. Then she bought Dylan new shoes. His old ones had holes in the soles. $35. She put $20 in the coffee can. That left $65 for food. She sat at the kitchen table and did the math one more time. Rent. Still owed $420. She had $106 total now. The $65 from today, the $41 from her check earlier in the week. She was still $314 short, and she had 48 hours. Marlene put her head in her hands. For the first time in her life, she thought about giving up, about walking away, about taking Dylan and leaving in the middle of the night and just disappearing. But where would they go? And how she didn't have enough gas to make it out of Arizona. She looked at the letter she'd started writing earlier, the one she'd hidden under a stack of bills. To Dylan, it said at the top, "If something happens to me, baby, I need you to know. You are the best thing I ever did. You are good and kind and strong. Never let this world make you hard. Never regret kindness. It's the only thing that matters. I love you. Always. Mom." She folded the letter and put it back under the bills. Then she went to bed. Friday night, 11 o'clock. Marlene lay in the dark staring at the ceiling. The water stain looked like it was dripping, moving, alive. She thought about her grandmother, about Robert, about every choice she'd made that had led her to this moment. She thought about the 5 men, the bikers, the check she'd torn up. Had it been worth it? $67 that could have kept the lights on, could have bought food, could have given Dylan something. She didn't know anymore. She just knew she was tired. So tired. Marlene closed her eyes and tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. So she just lay there in the dark and waited for morning. 500 miles away, 450 motorcycles were staging at 3 different locations around Tucson. Brothers checking engines, loading tools, counting cash, synchronizing watches. Preacher stood in the center of it all, looking at a map spread across the hood of a truck. "We move at 5:30, he said. "Converge at 6, surround the trailer. Show her what respect looks like." A lieutenant stepped forward. "What if she refuses?" "Then we leave it on her doorstep and ride away," Preacher said. "But we show up. We show her she's not alone." The lieutenant nodded. Preacher looked around at the sea of leather and chrome. 450 men. 450 bikes, $38,400. Tools, supplies, carpenters, mechanics, electricians, an army. All for a woman who'd torn up a $67 check. "Let's ride," Preacher said. The engine started. The sound was thunder. And 500 miles away, Marlene Hutchins had no idea what was coming. She lay in the dark alone, thinking she'd lost everything. But in 3 hours, the ground would start to shake, and her life would never be the same. Saturday morning, 3 o'clock. Marlene was still awake. She'd been lying in bed for 4 hours, staring at the water stain on the ceiling, listening to the wind push against the trailer. The sound was lonely. Everything was lonely. Her mind wouldn't stop running the numbers, over and over, like a broken machine that couldn't shut off. Rent, $420. She had 106, 314 short. The landlord would file eviction papers on Monday. 48 hours from now, they'd have 30 days to leave, maybe less. Where would they go? She had a cousin in Flagstaff. They hadn't spoken in 8 years, not since the cousin had accused Marlene of being too proud to ask for help, too stubborn, too much like their grandmother. Maybe the cousin was right. Marlene turned onto her side. The mattress springs creaked. Through the thin wall, she could hear Dylan breathing in the living room, slow and steady, asleep on the couch. At least one of them could sleep. She thought about the letter under the bills, the one she'd written to him, just in case. Her throat tightened. What kind of mother couldn't even keep a roof over her son's head? What kind of mother gave away $67 she didn't have to 5 strangers she'd never see again? Marlene closed her eyes, tried to picture her grandmother's face. Helen, the woman who'd raised her, who'd taught her that feeding people mattered more than eating yourself. Was Grandma wrong? Did kindness mean anything when you were about to lose everything? Marlene didn't know anymore. She just knew she was tired. Bone tired, soul tired, the kind of tired sleep couldn't fix. At 3:30, she gave up trying. She got out of bed and walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, stood at the window and looked out at the desert. The moon was setting. The sky was still dark, but there was a faint glow on the eastern horizon. Dawn was coming. Another day. Another chance to fail. Marlene drank the water and set the glass in the sink. Then she went back to bed and lay there in the dark waiting for the sun. She didn't know that 500 miles away, 450 motorcycles were already on the road. She didn't know that at that exact moment, Preacher Maddox was leading a convoy of over 100 bikes down Interstate 40 heading east. She didn't know that 2 more convoys were coming from the south and west, all converging on Tucson. She didn't know that in 2 hours and 17 minutes, her entire life was about to change. She just lay there in the dark, alone, waiting for morning. At 5:47 in the morning, the ground started to shake. Marlene felt it first in her spine, a low vibration that traveled up through the mattress and into her bones. She opened her eyes, stared at the ceiling. The water stain was vibrating. She sat up. The whole trailer was shaking. Not like an earthquake, like something else. Something rhythmic, mechanical. A sound was building, low at first, then louder. A deep rumbling thunder that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Marlene got out of bed. Her heart was pounding. She walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. At first, she couldn't process what she was seeing. Lights, hundreds of them. Headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Moving, circling, and then she understood. Motorcycles, not 1 or 2, not 10 or 20, hundreds. They were coming from every direction, pouring into the trailer park like a flood. The sound of their engines was deafening. The ground shook so hard her teeth rattled. Marlene's hands went numb, her vision tunneled. What is this? What's happening? In the living room, Dylan bolted upright on the couch. Mom. His voice was high and panicked. Mom, what's going on? She couldn't answer. She was frozen at the window watching the headlights circle closer. Closer. Dylan ran to her side. He looked out the window and went pale. Oh my God, he whispered. Outside, people were coming out of their trailers, neighbors in bathrobes and pajamas standing in their yards staring. Someone was screaming. Someone else was on their phone, probably calling 911. The motorcycles kept coming, more and more and more. They formed a ring around the trailer park, then a second ring, then a third. The sound was apocalyptic. Marlene's mind raced. She thought about the 5 men, the bikers, the checks she'd torn up. Did I do something wrong? Did I insult them? Are they here to hurt me? Her chest tightened. She couldn't breathe. Dylan grabbed her arm. Mom, we need to go. We need to get out of here. But there was nowhere to go. The motorcycles surrounded them completely. And then all at once the engine stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. Marlene stood at the window, Dylan clutching her arm, and stared out at the scene. 450 motorcycles. 450 riders in leather vests. All sitting motionless. All facing her trailer. The sun was just starting to rise. The sky was turning from black to deep blue to pale orange. The light caught on chrome and leather and made everything look surreal. Like a dream. Like a nightmare. A man stepped off one of the bikes. He was tall, broad-shouldered, gray hair, a vest covered in patches. He raised his hand and every single rider stayed perfectly still. Then he started walking toward the trailer. Marlene's legs almost gave out. Dylan held her up. Mom, he whispered. Mom, please, let's go inside. Lock the door. But she couldn't move. The man stopped 10 feet from the porch. He looked at her through the window. His face was hard, but his eyes were kind. He spoke. His voice was deep and carried easily in the silence. Marlene Hutchins. She felt her knees buckle. He knew her name. Dylan's grip tightened. Mom. Marlene forced herself to move. She let go of the curtain, walked to the door. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely turn the knob. She opened the door. The cold air hit her. She was barefoot, wearing sweatpants and an old t-shirt. Her hair was a mess. She looked like exactly what she was. A woman who'd been awake all night, terrified and exhausted, and at the end of everything. The man took one step closer, not threatening, just close enough to be heard without shouting. My name's Leonard Maddox, he said. People call me Preacher. I'm the president of the Hells Angels Nevada chapter. Marlene stared at him. Her mouth was dry. She couldn't speak. 3 days ago, Preacher continued, you fed 5 of my brothers. Raymond Bledsoe, Marcus Drummond, Wyatt Brennan, Jesse Whitlock, Colt Banner. The names hit her like punches. The 5 men, the bikers. Preacher kept talking. They just buried a brother, a man named Dutch Carver, 40 years in the club, a legend, a hero. They spent everything they had giving him a proper funeral. Everything. When they walked into your diner, they were broke, hungry, grieving. Marlene's vision blurred. Tears were coming, and she couldn't stop them. You didn't ask questions, Preacher said. You didn't judge them. You saw 5 men who'd buried family, and you made a choice. His voice softened. You tore up a $67 check. You fed them. You gave them dignity when they had nothing left. Marlene's hands were shaking. I didn't, she started. I couldn't let them leave hungry. I know, Preacher said. And your boss punished you for it. She nodded. Couldn't speak. We heard about it, Preacher said. All of us. Every chapter. Every state. And we decided something. He paused. You weren't going to face this alone. Marlene didn't understand. She shook her head. I don't. What Preacher turned and gestured to the sea of motorcycles behind him. We brought you something. And then, as if choreographed, the riders started moving. One by one they got off their bikes. One by one they walked toward her. Each one was holding an envelope. Marlene felt Dylan step up beside her, felt his hand slip into hers. The first rider reached the porch. He was maybe 50, scarred hands, kind eyes. He held out the envelope. From Nevada, he said, $4,200. Marlene couldn't move. Dylan reached out and took the envelope. The second rider stepped forward. A woman, mid-40s, tattoos up both arms. California chapter, she said. $6,800. Dutch saved my daughter from a fire 20 years ago. I never forgot. She pressed the envelope into Marlene's hands. The third rider, the fourth, the fifth, Arizona, $3,100. Texas, $2,900. From my mom. She was a waitress. $50. This is from our widow's fund, $1,200. The envelopes piled up. Marlene's arms were full. Dylan was crying. Neighbors were gathering at the edge of the circle, watching in stunned silence. And then Raymond Bledsoe stepped forward. Razor, the man from the diner, the one who'd looked at the check and said, we don't have it. He was holding something wrapped in plastic. Ma'am, he said. His voice was shaking. I'm sorry we scared you. We just wanted you to know you weren't forgotten. He unwrapped the plastic. Inside was a folded American flag, the kind they give to families at military funerals. Crisp, perfect, red and white and blue. Marlene stared at it, and then a young man stepped forward, 25. Red eyes, the one who'd hugged her in the diner. Wyatt Brennan. This was my father's flag, Wyatt said. His voice cracked. Dutch Carver, the man we buried. This flag covered his coffin. He was a Marine, a hero, and he taught me that honor means everything. Tears streamed down his face. You honored his memory by feeding us when we had nothing. He would have wanted you to have this. Wyatt held out the flag. Marlene took it with shaking hands. The fabric was soft and heavy and sacred. She clutched it to her chest and collapsed. Dylan caught her. Preacher stepped forward and steadied her other side. She was sobbing, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere so deep she didn't know it existed. All around her, 450 men and women stood in silence. Some had their hands over their hearts. Some were saluting. Some were crying too. Preacher waited until she could breathe again. Then he spoke. We also brought help, he said. We've got mechanics, carpenters, electricians. By the end of today, your car's going to run. Your roof's getting patched. Your steps are getting rebuilt. We're setting up a scholarship fund for Dylan. He paused. And we're making sure your boss pays back every cent he docked you. With interest. Marlene looked up at him. Her face was wet. Her voice was barely a whisper. Why Preacher smiled. It was a sad smile. A knowing smile. Because you showed us something we thought was dead, he said. You showed us that kindness still exists, that honor still matters. And when someone shows us honor, we protect them. He looked around at the 450 riders. All of us. And then the work began. It was like watching a military operation. 20 men descended on Marlene's car. They jacked it up, pulled the battery, tested the alternator. Within 15 minutes, they diagnosed the problem. Within 30, they had the part. Within an hour, the engine was purring like new. 15 more climbed onto the roof. Tarps came out, hammers, nails, sealant. They moved with precision, stripping away the damaged sections, replacing rotted wood, sealing every crack. A crew rebuilt the front steps. Another rewired the trailer's electrical panel. Someone planted flowers in the front yard. Someone else set up a generator and strung lights. And in the middle of it all, a portable grill appeared. Bacon started sizzling, eggs, pancakes, coffee brewed in giant urns. The smell filled the air. Neighbors who'd been scared at first started coming closer, curious, cautious. One of the riders, a man in his 60s with a kind face, walked over to an elderly neighbor and handed her a plate of food. On the house, ma'am, he said. Within an hour, the whole trailer park was eating breakfast. Marlene stood on her porch holding Dutch's flag, watching it all unfold. Dylan was beside her, his arm around her shoulders. She couldn't process it, couldn't believe it. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But it was. At noon, Preacher walked back over to her. He was holding one more envelope. This one's from all of us, he said. Marlene opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a check. $38,400. Her vision went white. Her ears started ringing. She felt herself falling. Dylan and Preacher caught her before she hit the ground. When she came to, she was sitting on the porch steps. Someone had given her water. Dylan was kneeling in front of her, his face pale and terrified. Mom, are you okay? She looked at him, then at the check in her hand, then at Preacher standing a few feet away. I can't, she whispered. I can't take this. Preacher knelt down so he was at eye level. You already gave us what mattered, he said quietly. You gave us dignity when we had nothing. You honored Dutch's memory. You reminded us why we live by a code. He reached out and closed her hand around the check. This isn't charity, Marlene. This is respect. And you don't owe us a damn thing. Marlene's chest heaved. She was crying again. She couldn't stop. Around her, the work continued. Hammers, drills, laughter, the smell of coffee and bacon. By 2 in the afternoon, the transformation was complete. The trailer looked better than it had in years. The roof was sealed. The steps were solid. The car started on the first try. Flowers bloomed in the yard. The riders started packing up, loading tools, mounting bikes. Preacher shook Marlene's hand, then Dylan's. We ride through here every October, he said. We'll check in, make sure you're okay. Marlene nodded. She still couldn't speak. Preacher tipped his head and walked back to his bike. The engine roared to life. One by one, the other engines started. The sound built. Thunder again. But this time Marlene wasn't afraid. She stood in her yard, Dylan beside her, and watched as 450 motorcycles pulled out in formation. Slow, respectful, orderly. Some of the riders waved, some honked, some revved their engines. And then they were gone. The desert was quiet again. Marlene stood there for a long time, just breathing, just trying to believe it had really happened. Dylan finally spoke. Mom, he said. His voice was soft. What just happened? Marlene looked down at the check in her hand. $38,400. She looked at the flag, Dutch's flag, an American flag that had covered a hero's coffin. She looked at her trailer, fixed, clean, whole. I don't know, baby, she whispered. I think kindness came back. Dylan put his arm around her. They stood there together watching the sun move across the sky. For the first time in 6 years, Marlene felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Monday morning, Marlene walked into the Dusty Plains diner. Vernon was behind the counter wiping down the coffee station. He looked up when she walked in. His face was neutral. "You're late," he said. Marlene didn't respond. She walked straight to the counter. "We need to talk," Vernon said. "About your attitude, about your work ethic, about..." The door opened. Preacher Maddox walked in. Behind him, three more riders. Raymond Bledsoe, Marcus Drummond, Wyatt Brennan. They walked to the counter and sat down. Calm, unhurried. Vernon went pale. His mouth opened, closed. Preacher looked at him, didn't smile, didn't blink. Coffee, Preacher said. Black. Vernon's hands shook as he poured. He set the cup down. Coffee sloshed over the rim. Preacher took a sip. Then he looked at Vernon again. "I believe you owe this woman $67, Preacher said. His voice was quiet, calm, plus 200 for emotional distress and humiliation. That's 267 total, Vernon stammered, at Marlene. His hands fumbled at His hands fumbled at the register. He pulled out bills, counted them twice. $267. He held them out to Marlene. His hand was shaking. "Marlene, quit," she said. Her voice was steady. "Quit," she said. Her voice was steady, strong. She untied her apron, folded it neatly, set it on the counter. Then she turned and walked out. The four riders stood, dropped cash on the counter for the coffee. Followed her. Outside, 450 motorcycles were waiting, parked in formation, engines idling. Preacher walked Marlene to her car. He opened the door for her. "You ever need anything," he said, "day or night, you call." He handed her a card. It had a phone number. All 450 at once. And as he walked to his bike, the engines roared. All 450 at once. And as Marlene pulled out of the parking lot in her newly fixed car, the motorcycles fell in behind her. An escort, a honor guard. They rode with her all the way to the highway. Then they peeled off one by one, heading back to their lives, their chapters, their families. But not before every single one of them saluted her as they passed. Marlene drove home with tears streaming down her face and $267 in her pocket and a check for $38,400 in her purse. She'd torn up a $67 check 3 days ago, and the world had torn up every rule she thought she knew. 1 year later, October, Saturday morning, Marlene stood in her yard cooking breakfast on a portable grill. Eggs, bacon, pancakes, coffee brewing in a big urn. The trailer looked different now. Fresh paint, new shutters, a small garden in the front, solar panels on the roof. Dylan stood beside her wearing a uniform from the trade school, electrician training. He'd graduated top of his class last month, already had 3 job offers. And down the road, the sound of engines. Marlene smiled, right on time. 450 motorcycles poured into the trailer park. The same formation, the same riders, an annual tradition. Preacher was first off his bike. He walked over and hugged Marlene. "How you doing, Marlene?" "Better than okay," she said. Thanks to you, Preacher corrected. "You started this. We just finished it." Wyatt came over next. He had a woman with him. Blonde hair, bright smile. "This is Sarah," he said, "my fiancée. Wanted her to meet the woman who changed everything." Marlene hugged them both. Raymond Bledsoe walked up. He looked different, healthier. His eyes were clear. 1 year sober today, he said. "Because you reminded me that good people still exist." Marlene's eyes filled. "I'm so proud of you, Raymond." The riders gathered around, plates in hand, eating breakfast, talking, laughing. And then Preacher called for quiet. He held up an envelope. "This year's scholarship fund for Dylan," he said. $15,000. Dylan's face went red. He looked at his mom. She nodded. "Go on, baby. Take it." Dylan walked forward, shook Preacher's hand. The riders applauded. Marlene stood in the middle of it all. 450 people who'd been strangers a year ago, who were family now. She thought about her grandmother, about Robert, about every hard choice and every impossible day that had led her here. And she thought about 5 men walking into a diner broke and grieving, asking for food they couldn't pay for. She'd torn up a check, and the world had given her back everything. Dignity costs nothing, her grandmother used to say. But sometimes if you are lucky, it's worth everything. Marlene looked around at the faces, the bikes, the food, the laughter. She'd given away $67 she didn't have. And she'd gotten back a family of 450. The kind of family that shows up at dawn with tools and calm and respect. The kind of family that never forgets. The kind of family that proves beyond any doubt that kindness is never wasted. It just takes time to come home. And when it does, it comes on 450 motorcycles.